What do you mean Vin is going to be the new director? I'm the one who saved this company. My voice echoed through the glass-walled conference room, bouncing off the sleek, modern furniture I had painstakingly chosen just a few months earlier. My mother's dismissive wave cut sharper than any insult. Lynn, sweetheart, your brother has more of a natural leadership style. You're too focused on the small details. Her tone was the same patronizing one she'd used when I was a child who didn't know better. The door swung open, and there he was, Vin, hands in his pockets. That same smug smirk he'd worn since we were kids. Sis, don't take it personally. I mean, you're great with the paperwork, but someone needs to focus on the big picture. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My name is Linh Phạm, and at 45 years old, I never thought I'd be standing here, fighting for basic recognition in my own family's company. After nearly 2 decades building my career at a top international consulting firm in Singapore, I had walked away from it all to come home to Hanoi and save the struggling family business. The irony was almost laughable. Out of everyone in the family, I was the only one with real business experience. I had managed teams across Asia, launched new product lines, navigated crises, and I had done it all without ever asking my parents for a single favor. Meanwhile, my younger brother Vin had floated from job to job, quitting whenever things got difficult. First, it was an events company, then a failed tech startup, and most recently, some vague investment firm that sounded more like his friends playing at business. None of that mattered now. The only thing my parents saw was that Vin was their son. The eldest son, the golden boy, the one they had always coddled, and now, after all my work, they were handing him the crown I had earned. It still didn't feel real. Just 8 months ago, my dad had called me from the hospital, his voice weak, his worry impossible to hide. The company was weeks away from insolvency. The debts had piled up, the orders were slowing, and competitors were circling like vultures. "If you come home, maybe we can save it," he'd said. "You're the only one who can." I didn't even think twice. I packed my life into 2 suitcases, left my high-rise apartment in Singapore, and flew home. The moment I walked into our factory, the place that had once been a source of pride for my grandparents, I realized just how bad it was. Outdated equipment, workers cutting corners just to keep production moving, no digital systems, no proper marketing, no customer retention strategy. It was chaos. I spent the next 6 months rebuilding everything from the ground up. Days were spent negotiating with suppliers, reworking production schedules, and learning every detail of the factory floor. Nights were a blur of financial statements, marketing plans, and strategy sessions with my tiny but loyal team. I leveraged every connection I had, from former clients to old classmates, and piece by piece, the company found its footing again. Sales climbed, our products started getting attention in new markets. I even convinced 2 major distributors to feature us in their year-end promotional campaigns. We were back from the brink, not just surviving, but thriving. But now, standing in this room facing my smirking brother and my parents' oblivious smiles, I realized something. None of that mattered. It didn't matter that I saved the factory. It didn't matter that I sacrificed my career, my life abroad, my financial security, all for this family. All they saw was Vin, their son, their heir. My success was just the prep work for his coronation. The worst part was that they were making the announcement tonight at the quarterly staff meeting. The same meeting where I was supposed to present our record-breaking sales figures and lay out my vision for the next phase of our expansion. I could already feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public. Every single employee knew who had saved this place. They had watched me walk the factory floor, roll up my sleeves and learn their names. They had seen me fight for better wages, negotiate for safer equipment, and push for the bonus program that had just been approved last month. They knew. And now they would have to sit there, pretending this was normal, pretending it was fair. My eyes met the gaze of Chu Ba, our longest-serving production supervisor, standing just outside the glass wall. His expression said it all, a mixture of sympathy, frustration, and silent understanding. He knew. They all knew. But in the end, none of it mattered, because family loyalty, or at least my parents' version of it, trumped everything else. Let me take you back a bit so you understand how we ended up here. The Pham Family Manufacturing Company has been in our family since my grandparents founded it in 1971. I practically grew up on the factory floor, weaving through rows of machinery while my mother handled client orders and my father inspected every piece of merchandise before it left the building. While other kids were playing hide and seek, I was learning how to calculate inventory and sitting in on supplier negotiations. The factory wasn't just my home, it was my first classroom, my playground, and later, my passion. Vin, though, he was different. 3 years younger than me, he never showed the slightest interest in the business. While I was studying supply chain management at university, Vin was changing majors every semester. Architecture, then business, then interior design, before eventually dropping out to find himself. Mum and Dad never seemed worried. "He's just creative," they'd say, brushing off my concerns. Not everyone's built for spreadsheets and schedules. Meanwhile, I was building a career in Singapore, working my way up from junior analyst to regional director at a global logistics firm. Every award, every promotion, every successful project, they were all met with the same lukewarm responses from my parents. "That's nice, dear," my mum would say. "But when are you coming home to get married?" It was never enough. Then came the call from my father, his voice hoarse, worn down by stress and illness. Orders were drying up, debt was piling higher than the machines, and several key clients had switched to competitors. "Lynn, we need you," he said, and despite everything I didn't hesitate. I gave up my condo in Singapore, withdrew most of my savings, and flew home. The moment I stepped into the factory, my heart sank. The equipment was ancient, workers were cutting corners to meet impossible quotas, and record keeping was practically non-existent. Even the smell, once a mix of fresh wood and clean metal, was stale, a physical reminder of decay. The first month was nothing but damage control. I replaced the rusting equipment, overhauled the outdated order system, and retrained the workers on quality control. I poured my own money into redesigning our production process, negotiating with suppliers, and launching an online marketing campaign that finally gave us visibility in the modern market. Every hour of my day, and most of my nights, was spent saving this factory. I brought in loyal contacts from Singapore, revived relationships with long-lost clients, and fought to rebuild our reputation from the ground up. The company went from the brink of collapse to showing its first profit in years. And where was Vin? Nowhere. He was networking in Saigon, which was the code for bouncing between rooftop bars, hosting boozy brunches, and posting motivational quotes on social media. Occasionally, he'd stop by the factory for a photo op, offer some offhanded big idea, none of which made sense, then vanish again. Yet somehow in my parents' eyes, his rare appearances were seen as leadership. my actual work, just helping out. The resentment built slowly, quietly, until it wasn't quiet anymore. For the past month, Vin had been parading around the factory like it was his kingdom, even though he barely knew how to read a production schedule. He announced changes without consulting anyone, slashing overtime, cutting out supplier relationships I'd spent months nurturing, even scrapping our loyalty program because he thought discounts made us look desperate. Just yesterday, I walked in to find him firing Ko-han, our longest-serving floor manager, for refusing to adopt his ridiculous flexible shift plan, which would have left us dangerously understaffed during peak production. I managed to step in and save her job, but I'll never forget the look in her eyes, humiliation, exhaustion, and disappointment all rolled into one. I tried talking to my parents. I laid out spreadsheets, customer reviews praising the improvements and financial projections showing the strongest quarterly results we'd had in over a decade. Dad stared into his coffee. Mum patted my hand and said, "Lynn, you need to let Vin find his own leadership style. He's full of wonderful ideas." That's when I saw it, the for sale sign at Ngokson Industrial Park while driving home. The building had once belonged to our main competitor, a state-of-the-art facility with newer machinery, better proximity to the shipping lanes, and double the production capacity of our aging factory. It had been shuttered the previous year when the owners retired, but its bones were still strong. I parked and sat there for nearly an hour, just staring at that sign. My mind replayed every moment, every patronizing pat on the head, every ignored suggestion, every time my parents chose Vin's lazy charm over my hard work. Something inside me broke, or maybe it finally healed. I called my old real estate contact from Singapore right there in the parking lot. The owners were desperate to sell, and thanks to my savings and strong credit history, I could make it happen. By the time I drove home, the viewing was already scheduled. For the first time in months, I felt alive. I wasn't going to beg my family to see my worth anymore. I was going to build something entirely my own, a company that valued skill, respect, and results. Let them see what they gave up when they handed everything to Vin. The next few months were a blur of construction dust, supplier meetings, and sleepless nights. While Vin was throwing parties in our family's old conference room, I was assembling a team of the best technicians, designers, and production experts I could find. Many of them were my old colleagues who respected my work ethic and vision. I called the new company Summit Manufacturing. Maybe a bit obvious, but I wanted the symbolism to be crystal clear. Word spread fast. Some people whispered that I was betraying my family. Others, especially the staff who had suffered under Vin's clueless management, quietly cheered me on. My parents tried guilt trips at first. "How could you turn your back on us?" Mum would ask over increasingly awkward dinners. I just smiled and changed the subject. Meanwhile, under Vin's leadership, family manufacturing was falling apart. Reviews from customers complained about missed deadlines, shoddy quality, and infuriating miscommunications. 3 senior floor supervisors quit within the first month, and more followed. I heard from my old contacts that they were slashing prices just to hold on to clients. A race to the bottom that everyone knew ended in disaster. The grand opening of Summit Manufacturing happened exactly 6 months after that day in the conference room. I'll never forget the look on my parents' faces when they walked in. Mum's tight smile, Dad's quiet disbelief, and Vin's thinly veiled fury. The local business paper was there, taking photos and interviewing our guests about Hanoi's newest state-of-the-art production facility. "You're trying to destroy us," Vin hissed when he cornered me after the ribbon cutting. "This is personal." "Oh, no, Vin," I said, meeting his glare. This is me succeeding, despite you. The difference between Summit and FAM Manufacturing was painfully obvious. While their factory was crumbling under Vin's incompetence, Summit was breaking records for efficiency and innovation. Every feature I dreamed of implementing at our family's business, sustainable processes, advanced tracking systems, and a worker wellness program, was now thriving under my leadership. But success came with its own cost. Former family friends refused to meet me for coffee. Some suppliers mysteriously cancelled contracts after pressure from my mother's social circle. I even lost my seat on the local trade council, but I didn't need them. Every challenge made me smarter, sharper, and more determined. And when the Hanoi Industrial Awards nominated Summit Manufacturing for Best New Production Facility, while FAM Family Manufacturing was nowhere to be seen, the message couldn't have been clearer. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I had built my own legacy. During my acceptance speech at the Hanoi Business Excellence Awards, I stood before a ballroom filled with industry leaders, my team, and some familiar faces from my past. I thanked my staff, the backbone of Summit Manufacturing, for their tireless work and belief in the vision we built together. I even mentioned FAM Family Manufacturing, the factory where I first fell in love with the complexities and rhythms of production. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, understanding the weight behind my words without me needing to spell it out. But it was the conversation after the ceremony that stuck with me. A well-known journalist from Vietnam Business Weekly approached me, asking for an in-depth interview about Summit's success. As we talked about the innovation, the struggles, the bold decisions that had brought us here, I caught sight of my parents standing just a few meters away. They were trying to look casual, but I knew they were listening to every word. I didn't sugarcoat the truth. I told the journalist about how my family had passed me over, how they gave the company I'd saved to someone with no experience or respect for the craft, and how, instead of begging for scraps at a table that didn't value me, I built my own. Sometimes, I said loud enough for my parents to hear, the best success stories come from being underestimated. The journalist's eyes lit up at the quote. My parents' faces paled. Later that night, the journalist quietly told me that Summit Manufacturing would be featured in their annual list of Vietnam's top emerging enterprises, not just for our innovation, but for our leadership in sustainable production. And in the same issue, there would be a companion piece on legacy businesses struggling to modernize, with FAM Family Manufacturing as the central case study. When the article was published, it landed in our town like a thunderclap. For years, gossipers had whispered that I was bitter and vengeful, but now the truth was in black and white. I had built something remarkable while FAM Family Manufacturing withered under my brother's incompetence. Not because of me, but because of choices my parents had made. Looking back now, it's complicated. Part of me still aches from the years I spent craving my parents' approval. All the times I worked late into the night hoping they'd notice. All the sacrifices I made to preserve their legacy. But there's another part of me, the part that stands in Summit's glass-walled conference room overlooking the factory floor, that feels whole for the first time in my life. I'm living on my terms now. Not for their approval, not for anyone's validation, just for me. The factory hums with energy every morning. My team, a blend of seasoned professionals and eager young workers, move with purpose. They know they're part of something special. They know their work is respected here. When I walk the floor, I hear conversations filled with ideas and solutions, not fear and frustration. The smell of freshly cut wood and clean metal feels alive again, not stale like it did in my family's factory. This is what I always wanted. My team has become my family in ways I never expected. Many of them, including Ko Han, my longtime floor manager, followed me from farm family manufacturing because they saw in me the kind of leader they never had. When we won our first national award, Han hugged me so tightly she nearly lifted me off the ground. "You gave us something worth building again," she said. "That means more than any award." That moment still brings tears to my eyes. Outside of work, I've started rebuilding my personal life too. For years, I was so consumed with proving my worth to my parents that I neglected friendships, skipped reunions, and kept my world painfully small. Now, I'm making time for old friends, lunches that stretch into dinners, hiking trips, and spontaneous coffee dates with people who knew me before all of this. Some of them admit they didn't know what to think when I first split from my family's business. Like if my parents had believed in me from the start. If they'd seen my work, my sacrifices, my vision. If they'd chosen me instead of Vin. I don't think I'll ever fully stop wanting that. But I've made peace with the fact that their approval isn't something I need to thrive. 3 weeks after the award ceremony, my parents invited me to dinner, just the three of us. I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. I wasn't expecting an apology, but part of me wanted to hear whatever they had to say. When I arrived, the house felt smaller than I remembered. My mum's smile was too bright, and my dad couldn't stop fiddling with his teacup. They asked about the weather, about Summit's latest order, about my upcoming travel plans. It was painfully obvious they were working up to something. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Lynn, we're proud of you," he said softly. "What you've built, it's remarkable." My mother nodded, her smile wobbling. "We know we haven't always shown it, but we do see it now." Their words should have made me happy, but they felt too rehearsed, too late. I thanked them politely, waiting for what I knew was coming. It didn't take long. "Vin's struggling," my mother admitted. "The factory's losing orders, and we're in danger of defaulting on one of our loans. We were hoping you could help him. Maybe guide him through some of what you've learned." I let their request hang in the air, studying them, my mother's clenched fingers, my father's hunched shoulders. These were the people who had dismissed me, belittled me, ignored my expertise, and now they wanted me to rescue the son they had chosen over me. "I offered to help a year ago," I said quietly. "You chose Vin. Now you're asking me to fix his mess. After everything?" I shook my head gently. "That's not my responsibility anymore." My mother opened her mouth, but I cut her off softly. "I'll give you advice if you want it. I can recommend suppliers, software, and even suggest training programs. But I won't come back. Not to clean up after Vin, and not to prove anything to either of you." The silence stretched long and heavy. My dad nodded once, stiffly, while my mom pressed her lips together to keep from arguing. I stood, thanked them for dinner, and left, lighter than I'd felt in years. Over the next few weeks, I felt that lightness settle deeper into my bones. Saying no to my parents gave me permission to say no elsewhere too. To clients who didn't respect my boundaries. To projects that didn't align with my values. To relationships that drained me. Every no made room for a better yes. At Summit, we kept growing, orders poured in, our reputation stretched far beyond Hanoi. Other manufacturers started asking for consulting help, and my calendar filled with speaking invitations at industry conferences. Meanwhile, whispers of family manufacturing's decline grew louder, though I heard they finally hired an outside consultant. Even so, Vin and I rarely spoke. That silence no longer hurt. It felt necessary. Standing in Summit's courtyard one bright morning, sunlight glinting off the glass facade I'd designed, I watched my team laugh as they prepared for a new shipment. This was my legacy. Not something I inherited, not something handed to me out of pity, but something I'd built from the ground up with grit, vision, and heart. For years I measured my worth by my parents' approval. Now I measured it by my own reflection, in every product that left our floor, in every team member who found purpose at Summit, and in the life I built without apology. And for the first time, that was enough.